Good morning, Shmuel. It's Sunday. Woo! And I have the books in the background because I want to talk about a book today. This is the book. You really can't tell what it is from the cover. I picked it up at a used bookstore. I had no clue what was in it because there's no description, but boy, am I glad I found it. Today, I want to talk about The Way of All Flesh by Samuel Butler. The Way of All Flesh is a semi-autobiographical novel that was written at the end of the 19th century. Butler started the novel in 1872, when he was 37 years old, but it wasn't published until 1903. That's a lot of years in between, like 30. Why did he not publish it in between all that time? Well, he was waiting for his parents to die. The novel would have embarrassed Samuel's parents because it painfully details the abuse that the protagonist, Ernest, suffers at the hands of his parents. And like I said, it is a semi-autobiographical novel, so that is pretty awkward. But to me, the most interesting aspect of the novel is the protagonist's religious journey from birth to adulthood. When Ernest is born, he is baptized in holy water. Butler writes about his toddler years. Before Ernest could well crawl, he was taught to kneel. Before he could well speak, he was taught to lisp the Lord's Prayer and the General Confession. How was it possible that these things could be taught too early? From the parent's perspective. If his attention flagged or his memory failed him, here was an ill weed which would grow apace, unless it were plucked out immediately, and the only way to pluck it out was to whip him, or shut him in a cupboard, or dock him some of the small pleasures of childhood. Yes, that is pretty sad. For Ernest, religion is entwined with unfairness and pain from a very young age. As a young adult, Ernest is sent to college to become a clergyman like his father. Although he doesn't feel any connection to Christianity and tries to resist, there is simply nothing else for him to do. He hasn't been given any training that could lead to practical employment, such as carpentry or shoemaking. He is too old now for an apprenticeship. With no other choice, Ernest becomes a clergyman, although he is passionless and dispirited. Butler makes it clear that this turn of events is unfortunate, not just because Ernest is agnostic, but also because it is disrespectful to the church, which deserves representatives who truly feel a calling and a passion for faith. When Ernest is almost finished with college, he finds himself listening to a riveting guest lecturer. The lecturer understands fully well that many of the boys sitting before him are ambivalent about religion. He gets them fired up with a step-by-step, seemingly rational argument. Every wise person you know believes in Christianity. Every respectable person, from the king to your teachers to the pope to your parents. And now I'm sure that you believe as well, he says, since you're such smart boys. So why don't you do what Christ says? Follow the Bible. Give up all your wealth and live among the poor. Be a true Christian. The speech is incredibly compelling, especially for someone like Ernest, who experiences the pull of a well-structured speech for the first time. If you believe X, then you must do Y. Ernest has never thought deeply about the purpose of his life. He has never thought about the implications of truly believing in the religion that he half-heartedly holds to be true. Ernest feels that this speech has truly changed his life, and he becomes a radical believer. With an overly simplistic understanding of what it means to be a good Christian, Ernest becomes annoyingly pretentious. He imagines that he is wiser than everyone else, and that the path he is taking is the only obvious way, that anyone who is doing something different is simply stupid and needs to be educated. After losing all of his money and causing serious harm to the poor people he means to help, Ernest is forced to reconsider his perspective. The book ends with a clear moral lesson. One should never become a radical or an extremist of any kind. The middle road is the only sane ideology. Now, if that sounded like I was reading, it's because I was. I'm still not so good at writing an essay out loud, but the rest of this I do want to say out loud. First of all, the really interesting part of this book is that it is so ahead of its time. I mean, what they were writing about in the 1840s, we're talking about the Victorian era, okay? There was like a blind faith in Christianity. Even some of the authors who are considered maybe like more radical religiously, like Charlotte Bronte, who writes about religion in Jane Eyre, but she still just never questions the tenets of Christianity at its base. She'll question one type or another type of Christianity, but she never really goes into it like this. This is a book about faith, and my first thought when I read it was that this book is ahead of its time, but actually I don't think it's ahead of its time. I think it was setting the tone for the turn of the century, when the year 1900 came along and people really became willing to talk about these issues, not just in an intellectual setting, which had been happening already since the beginning of the Enlightenment in the 1800s, but in fiction, in a lighthearted manner. Again, it's a very funny book. It's hard to get across because of how literally sad it sounds, but it's a very funny book. So I really appreciated that. I'm so glad I stumbled across this. I feel it's an important book. Historically, it's very significant, and it was definitely a fun read. And that's why, Shmuel, I've been telling you to read it for these past few months, so please read this book, even though I've just given away the entire plot. And then on a more personal note, I wanted to say that I totally relate to this journey that this boy is going through in the novel. When I was in high school, I felt ambivalent about my faith. I'm Jewish, if you are not Shmuel and don't know that for some reason. Yeah, anyway. When I was in high school, I didn't know if I wanted to believe or not, and I didn't know what believing really meant. And then when I went off to seminary, I had teachers who talked in much the same way as the entertaining lecturer in the novel. Teachers who had a very clear vision of what being Jewish and being religious meant to them. And that was very compelling for me at the time because I was looking for something like that. I felt lost, I felt purposeless, and that kind of like very clear sighted talk with the step by steps of what you have to do to be a good Jew, what you should be doing every day, and what you should be believing was very compelling for me. And I do think I fell into that for a while, but something was still missing, and it wasn't right. The way that I was acting and doing and thinking about others, the way that I was being set up to feel, it wasn't the right thing. And I really feel that this book totally encompasses this coming of age story, which is definitely true for me, and I think is true for a lot of religious people of different religions, that it's just not captured in the classic coming of age tale that you normally read in a novel, which is all about, sexuality and growing up and finding a job maybe, but the religious aspect of finding where you belong within your faith is just lacking from most novels. I do feel that this book it immediately encapsulates that feeling, and I do feel that I too became anti-radicalization as part of my growing up process, and I grew beyond what the teachers told me in seminary. And the way that I think about religion now is that it still has a place. Like, Butler is not ever going to actually totally give up religion, but he is going to be able to look at it from the outside. And that's why we should not be extremists. Thanks to Samuel Butler. Have a wonderful Sunday, Shmuel.